House needs painting, grass needs mowing, where's he at?
Hi, this is Hank. Sorry I missed your call. Leave me your name and your number and I'll get back to you.
He's gone fishing.
Hello and welcome to Off the Water with Hank Parker, and I have my beautiful co-host Sarah Beth,
Hello.
who happens to be my granddaughter, who's wearing a hat today.
I am. I never wear hats.
I had to get up too early in the morning to fix that pretty hair.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I get it. Well, I fix mine. It takes me about a minute and a half to blow dry mine. How about yours?
About 2 hours. The thickness.
So I have it a little bit easier.
Understand. I'd
Hey,
say you
today we got a great show, and it's one of our more popular. We've done one every month since we've been doing the podcast, where we have a question and answers where people write in and they ask questions. Also, I'm gonna throw in a few stories. I had a lot of requests. Hey, we like to hear some of those fishing stories. I want to know more about some of your adventures. So we're gonna throw in a few fishing stories along the way, and we're gonna try to answer these questions that people have wrote in. We've just handpicked a few of them, and we've tried to pick the most difficult. So
Yeah.
Sarah Beth, why don't you go for it, and we'll get started with question and answers.
All right. Question number 1 from Jamie Turner said, question, I fished in Hartwell and Kiwi in South Carolina all my life for catfish, etc. Is it illegal in South Carolina to chum with dry or canned dog food?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think so. I don't think there's a rule against it. I know some people that do that, and I've never heard. But I will tell you a rule that I found out just the other day that I did not know in the state of South Carolina. When you put out these noodles or jugs for catfish, you have to have a special license or permit to do that, and also you can't have a rod and reel in the boat. If you go out there and put out all these jugs, a buddy of mine asked me the other day, said, did you know that was a law? I got a ticket. I had no idea. I went out, and my grandson and we fished for bass most of the day, and then they wanted to put out jugs for catfish, and so we put out these long noodles, and man, we caught a bunch of catfish, and we got checked by a wildlife officer, and we didn't have a license, or we didn't have... we had rod and reel in the boat, and we got a ticket for it. So I didn't know. Now, what are you doing? Giggling?
I'm Googling that because I don't want to tell anybody something and then squirrel police be knocking on their door saying.
Google it and let's find out the answer. Right here live on Off the Water. We're going to find out. All right, here we go.
Yep. Chumming is tossing or hanging trout. Okay, that's the definition of chumming.
Chumming.
Okay, it says it is perfectly legal in South Carolina to chum with dog food, although some local laws restrict it or beat shark fishing. So I guess according to Google, it is legal to chum with dog food.
Okay. Well, one of the methods that is illegal to chum with dog food, some people put them in cabbage bags or vegetable bags and they sink it. That bag is considered littering.
Right.
So you can't do that necessarily and be legal. You can put the dog food in there, but you can't put the wrapper.
Yeah.
Or you can't throw a sack of dog food in. You can put the dog food out. It's probably environmentally safe and it'll degrade, whereas that bag won't. So
right.
It's probably illegal to do it in a vegetable bag, as a lot of people do. So
hey, when in doubt, Google.
When in doubt, Google. Man, I hate Google. My whole life has been changed because of Google. I used to argue with my wife, and I'd win every argument.
Not anymore.
And I'm so persuasive,
I'll tell you, he'll talk you out that Elvis song when it says you ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. He thought it was trifling. For how many years?
How
many years?
Trifling all the time. All right, so I was wrong, and Giggle proved me wrong. That's why I don't like Giggle. So I try not to giggle, So, all
right, moving on.
Another question, maybe Giggle will answer this one.
Question number 2. It's from Tim Clark. It says, question about current fishing. Which direction do you want your boat position, and which direction do you want to fish your lure, with the current or against?
Okay, well, there is a rule, and the rule is you want to bring your lure with the current because fish face the current. That's the way they stabilize their position. So they face the current, and when you bring your lure with the current, the fish is facing your lure. However, there are some exceptions. Bobby Murray, who we had as a guest on our podcast just a couple of weeks ago, Bobby won the first Bassmaster Classic doing the opposite. He would bring the bait behind the fish in that real clear water at Lake Mead out in Nevada. If they saw it coming, they would just follow it. But if he snuck up behind them, he would get them to react to it out of impulse, and he would catch them. So the rule of thumb is you want to bring the bait in the direction the fish are facing, unless the water is crystal clear and you're trying to trick them to get an impulse bite, then you sneak up behind them. So let me tell you, when you're fishing a farm pond, the vast majority of people want to be able to cast with the wind because it makes casting so much more convenient and you don't get as many overruns. But the wind dictates the current, so you're throwing in the opposite direction. You need to cast into the wind and bring your bait with the current because that's the way the fish are facing.
All right. Well, then moving on to the next question.
All right.
Do you have your live scope transducer on a separate pole? And if so, what do you recommend?
That is a real good question, and I definitely appreciate it. I use Humminbird's Mega Live, and I have it on Target Lock, which is another device that Humminbird makes, and it's so cool because if you see a fish and it's on your troll motor and you need to reposition your troll motor, you lose that fish. And on Target Lock, even if your boat is moving, once you hit lock, it stays on that fish. No matter where your boat goes, if the wind moves it or if you don't respond with your troll motor and keep it in place, that Target Lock device still keeps that transducer locked on that fish. So I love the Target Lock, and it's been a big asset for me on my Mega Live.
All right. Well, I think that answers that. Next question. This is from Steve from Alabama, and he specified that he's from Alabama for whatever reason.
Alrighty.
But anyways, he said that he had watched one of our previous podcasts talking about the innovation of fishing, but he said we never touched on the plastic worm, and he wants to know, how has the plastic worm changed?
Well, that's really interesting. We talked earlier about the foundation of bass fishing a couple of weeks ago and talked about some of the controversy that has arisen over the years in fishing. We're in the middle of several controversial topics as we go down the line. But one of the big controversies early on in 1970 was the topwater fishermen were feel threatened by the worm fishermen. The topwater baits in the 50s and the 60s dominated the design of lures, and now all of a sudden the plastic worm comes into play, and the plastic worm is getting all the publicity. So they were worried about topwater being pushed aside, and so at that time a lot of them were wanting to have a topwater only bass tournament, do away with the plastic worm.
Yeah.
So the plastic worm, when it came on the scene, it became the dominant lure, and it has maintained that position for many years, and there's been a lot of changes in the plastic worm. You know, Cream Lure Company, they were one of the first. They're still in business today, by the way. I learned that at the Bassmaster Classic. They've never gone out of business. From the day they started back in late 50s or early 60s, whenever it was, I'm not sure of the date, they still make the old cream plastic worm, and that's pretty impressive. But man, there's been so much change. You know, it used to be you could get them in black, or you get them in red, or earthworm colored. And now you can get them in every color that's ever even been dreamt of, and colors that you've never even dreamed of. There's so many different colors, and some very transparent, some dark, some with glitter in them. Now they're injected with scent, they're injected with salt, they're injected with garlic. They're injected with different flavors and different taste. And, you know, Tom Mann, he came out with the jelly worms back in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. And he had strawberry and blueberry and raspberry and blackberry and all these different. I asked him one day, I said, Tom, Do you really believe that a blackberry flavored worm will catch more fish than just a regular black plastic worm? And at that time, Kmart was bigger than Walmart. And he said, well, I've never had a bass walk into a Kmart and buy a pack of worms. He said, you got to sell them first. So that scent was attractive to the angler walking down the aisle at Kmart. It smelled good. So
Yeah.
it smelled good. So he would end up buying them. But there's been so much, and then Berkeley came out back about 1980 with the power bait, where they cooked this very bad smell, very, very bad smell. The first bag that I got, I had them in my car and I had them sealed up, and my kids were small. And boy, they opened that bag of worm, and their mother turned around and said, has somebody had an accident? It did not smell very good. So a Man's Bait Company made that first run, and they called them stink bait. I think every lady that worked for Man's threatened to quit when the power baits were made in Eufaula, Alabama. But there's been a lot of change to plastic worms. Gary Yamamoto came out with a bait that just fell kind of funny and called it a Cinco. That revolutionized. So change after change after change. And now I'm working with a company out of Canada called X-Zone, and they make a worm that's called a deception worm. They make several worms that float. And I'm thinking it is making a lot of difference. If you look at the profile of that bait in a swimming pool or in really, really clear water, even Texas rig, with that bait floating, it changes the whole look and profile of that bait. And I've caught so many fish on that thing, and I think that is a big factor. So even with all the changes made, there's still changes being made every day to the plastic worm. And I would venture to say, without having any documentation on this at all, my Hank Parker theory or speculation, that there's still more fish caught every year on a plastic worm than any other bait out there. It is the producer, whether it's on a shaky head, whether it's on a drop shot, whether it's on a Carolina rig, whatever. I think that the plastic worm is still the #1 fish catching bait out there.
Absolutely. All right. Well, then that's all that I had for questions. Next thing is just the fishing stories. I know you mentioned Lake Powell was your first one you were going to start with.
Well, I had a fella that I ran into the other day, said, hey man, I've been watching your podcast, and my favorite part of the podcast is when you tell stories of events that took place that you were involved in out on the tournament circuit and throughout your career, and you don't do that often enough. I thought, okay, I'll tell some stories. And probably the wildest single adventure for me as a tournament angler, my second year on the bass circuit, we were involved in a gas shortage. It was rationing gasoline. Most stations would not let you buy but 5 gallons at a time. You couldn't go in and fill up your car. And gasoline went just quadrupled in price with this gas shortage in 1979. So Ray Scott had scheduled a tournament at Lake Powell in Arizona. I'm thinking it was a late spring tournament, and we were right in the middle of the gas shortage. So Lake Powell in Arizona is a long way from Denver, North Carolina, which is where I lived at the time. Or actually, I lived in Clover, South Carolina at that time. So Lake Powell, Arizona is a long way from Clover, South Carolina. So I ventured out. I bought a car that got better fuel mileage than my Chevrolet Suburban. I bought a Pontiac station wagon. I said Pontiac like Richard Petty. Pontiac station wagon that got a little better gas mileage than my Suburban, and I took off for Lake Powell. Took me like 7 days to get there. We would pull up and get in line. You'd get off at an exit, and they would only sell you 5 gallons at a time. So you'd pull in and get in line and get 5 gallons. You'd leave that service station, go in another. I had people throwing eggs at me, people cursing me out. Here people are in their Volkswagen Beetle sitting in line to get enough gasoline to go to work. And here I am with a big bass boat with out-of-state license plates going to Arizona. And people didn't like that. Oh, it was just excruciating. It was unbelievable. So you would stop to get gasoline, which would normally take you less than 15 minutes, and you might be 2 hours getting your car filled up because you had to wait in line to buy 5 gallons. Then you had to leave that line and go get in another line and wait again and again and again. It'd take 20-gallon tank would take 4 stops for getting in line to buy gasoline. So it was a nightmare. Well, in the days of early bass fishing, a lot of the pros, and I was one of them, we would charter airplane on the day before the practice started. The day before official practice, we'd charter an airplane, we'd take our notepads and our paper maps, and we would fly the lake, and we would observe, and we would try to figure out where we're going to fish. Well, now, Lake Powell was just totally different. You know, I grew up fishing in the South. I grew up fishing Lake Wiley, Lake Wateree, Lake Murray, Santee Cooper. I fished mostly what would be called shallow water lakes. You know, 100-foot water is not deep at all at Lake Powell. Matter of fact, you could actually be in your boat and touch a bluff wall and be in 500 feet of water, straight down. It was just crazy. I'd never seen anything like this in my life ever. So realizing all of that and looking at the topographical map and seeing how much water and how much depth we had to deal with, how is a southern boy that has never seen water this deep, how's he going to evaluate this lake? How's he going to put it together? And how's his practice going to go? Well, I marked all kinds of things on my map, not really knowing what I was going to need to do. I'd mark these areas. And I practiced the first day of that tournament with Woo Days. Woo, a Bassmaster Classic champion, won in 2020 in Chicago. But in those days, Woo and I were good buddies, and we practiced together, and we did really poor that first day. Really, really poor. I don't think we caught but 2 or 3 fish. And when we came in, man, we're hearing people talk about catching 25 and 30 and catching 18, 19, 20 pounds. And golly bum, man, we're in trouble. And so I went back that night and I started digging into my map. And one place I had marked on my map when we flew over, I could see this big boulder underneath the water. And the water's crystal clear. It looked like Dasani drinking water. So it's just crystal clear. And this rock, this boulder, was under the water. And I could actually see as we flew over, I had the pilot fly over it 2 or 3 times, and I could actually see dark spots that I thought could possibly be bass. So I had marked that on my map. Well, after Woo and I bombed out that first day, I thought, well, I've got to completely change my method for how I'm going to fish. So I finally navigate, and Lake Powell is a giant lake. Man, it is the Grand Canyon dammed up. It's a lot like Lake Mead, and crystal clear water, and it's rough, wind blows, it's a treacherous lake. So we're out there in 18-foot bass boats with 150 horsepower motors on them and Mercury outboard, and you've got to go a long, long way. There's no place to buy gasoline. You had Wall-Weep Lodge is where we took off, and about 90 miles up the river is Bullfrog. And so those were the only 2 places to buy gasoline. So to go to Bullfrog and back was like 180 miles or 160 miles. No way you had enough fuel. So you had to have, we took NASCAR bladder tanks. And that way, when you empty the gas out of them, you could fold them up. They wouldn't be in your way, which is now illegal. But at that time, they were legal. So we had these bladder tanks. We fill them up with gas, and we go to Lake Powell. So I'm starting to hunt this rock. Well, this rock was in a place called Hidden Canyon. I didn't know that at the time because I didn't pay attention to the mouth, how you get out. Man, it was really hard. It was just a little narrow open. And once you got your boat in there, man, you could go for miles, and it was big, big, big bay. and there was a rock pile in the back of it. So I go out there and I'm throwing a deep diving crankbait, and I throw it as far as I can possibly go, and I crank it down, get down on my knees, stick my rod in the water, and I touch the top of that rock, and boom. I caught about a 3.5, 4 pound bass, which is a nice, nice fish. And when I did, there were probably 50 bass following him to the boat. I thought, oh boy, I have found me something now. I like this. I got something going. So as I finished the last day of practice, I had nothing else going. I had one rock pile, and that was my go-to everything. So I drew a guy named Don Seifer from California, and he was my partner. Very nice guy. Did not know Don. He knew a little bit about me, but not much. And so he and I were partners, and we go to this rock pile. Well, I had never heard of a spider jig in my life. Didn't have a clue what a spider jig was. Well, a spider jig is a transparent, clear bait designed by Bobby Garland, slips on a lead head, and it's got 2 little tails that you put on the back to keep that skirt in place, or you can use a little super glue, and you can put that thing on a 1/2 ounce head. And that's what Don Seifert had done. So we pull up, and I get the boat in position, and I heave that crankbait out there, and I throw it beyond that rock, and I start cranking. And about the time I get it just about right, Don Seifert says, get the net. So now my cast is wasted. I got to lay my rod down, grab the net, and dip up his fish. So we put it in the boat. And so I pick up, and I got to wind in and spend all that time, because now my bait's not in position to hit the top of the rock. So I got to make another. So I make another long cast, and I get that thing, and I start cranking, and I get about halfway, just about right, and Seifert says, get the net. So I get the net again.
Oh, man.
Well, that goes on times 7. I've not even made a cast that counts. I haven't even got to retrieve to touch the top of the rock. He's got a limit of bass. It's a 7-fish limit. He's got a limit, and I hadn't got a fish. So I looked at him, I said, I never heard, what is that bait you're using? He said, it's called a spider jig. It's a Bobby Garland spider jig in smoke color. I said, what are the chances that I could borrow one of those? And being a great guy, he said, man, you're welcome to them. I got one right here. Got your name on it. I said, man, give me one of those things. And to make a long story short, Don Seifer was such a gentleman that he said, I'm gonna back off here a little bit, and I'm gonna let you catch you a couple of fish before I cast. Very unusual in a bass tournament. Super guy. And so I ended up catching a limit of fish on that spider jig, which I had never seen before in my life. And compliments of Don Seifer, who loaned me a spider jig. Well, he and I started fishing, and the only thing that I had was that rock pile. That's it. I didn't know where there was another bass in Lake Powell. So I started trying to figure out where and how to catch these bass. And Seifer said, why don't we fish these cracks in these bluff walls? You see these big bluff walls, they're 100 feet deep, but these big cracks, sometimes they hold fish. So we ended up catching 5 or 6 more fish apiece and culled and got a better limit of fish and fishing the cracks in the wall. So the second day of that tournament, I drew a jerk. I mean, the guy was an outright jerk. And he wanted to beat me more than anything in the world. He's a California boy. And he was in that East versus West deal. I refused to get engaged in that. I love Dee Thomas. I love Dave Glebe. I met Gary Klein for the first time, who, by the way, ended up winning that event. But this guy that I drew, and I won't call his name, he was hell-bent on beating me at any cost. So we go in and we start fishing these cracks in the wall, and he catches 7 when I only have 5. And he looked and he said, because it was a 2-hour boat ride to get to where we were at, and so we spent about 2 hours fishing. Well, we had a 2-hour boat ride back, so it was his turn to have the front of the boat. He said, okay, it's my turn. I said, well, let me finish getting my limit. There was about 15 more cracks, and he said, no, you didn't understand. It is my turn. We're getting out of here. I said, oh, okay. So we go out on the main river and we fish in 400 feet of water all day long. He didn't get another bite, nor did I get another bite, but he was happy because he beat me. He had 7, I only had 5.
Wow.
And just a very bad experience. So here I fished with a guy from California the first day named Don Seifer, was the nicest guy in the entire world. Then I drew a jerk for the second day. And so that was a very competitive tournament and very important to get those Bassmaster Classic points. So the last day of that tournament, I go out and I start fishing these cracks, and we don't catch any fish. So I go more back to the back of the bay where my rock pile was, and we catch 2 or 3 off of this rock. And I said rock pile. It wasn't a rock pile. It was one individual boulder. So I go back to that, and we catch 2 or 3 off of that. And then I start looking at these rock slides where there'd been a huge rock slide. And I'm thinking, all those rocks that slid off are down there under the water.
Wow.
Man, I killed them. I caught, Bo Dowden and I tied for big bass. I caught a 7-13, which is a giant bass at that time for Lake Powell.
Yeah.
And I had the biggest string of the tournament the last day. I'm pretty famous for that, I think. But I had the biggest string of the tournament the last day, and I moved up. And I had so much fun because I parked my boat beside of the guy that was such a jerk the day before. And his whole goal in the whole tournament was to beat me. That's
Wow.
all he wanted to do. So he was so happy. And he got his 7 fish out of the boat. Now he's like 2.5 pounds ahead of me because he'd weighed in 7 the day before, and I'd only weighed in 5. He caught about the same amount of weight that I caught the first day. So we're pretty locked in there, and he's got me. He's got me. I put 6 fish in the boat, and he's watching me. And I see out of the corner of my eye, he is intently watching me. And so I had those 6 fish, and I closed the live well down as if that was all I had. Mm-hmm. And you could see him gloat. Man, he's got me beat. He was so happy. And then I said, oh, I got one more. And I opened that live well, and I pulled that 7-pounder in there. And you would have thought he had seen a ghost. He turned white. It made him absolutely sick. So he went up to get in the weigh-in line, and I fought through the line where I could just get right behind him. And I rubbed it in. I said, hey, look what I got. He said, I see it. I said, man, I got him. I think I'm going to beat you. What you think? Oh, it was just killing him, made him sick. But it was a great tournament. I ended up finishing 9th, and I caught the big fish. Bo Dowden and I tied for big fish, and Ray Scott made us have a foot race. I was the heaviest I'd ever been in my life. I'd quit smoking 2 years before that, and I'd gained about 50 pounds. I was fat as a hog. Oh, and he made Bo Dowden and I have a foot race for the tie for big bass. And they got us down in 3-point stance, and we were on a steep ledge at Wallweep Lodge, and Ray said 1, 2, and on 2, I kicked Bo in the butt. And he fell down that mountain. I thought it killed him. It was awful. But Ray thought it was the funniest thing in the world. But it was I won the race, by the way. Bo was rolling down the mountain. I was running the race. So it was just such a fun time. And I have to say, we drove. I've always been fascinated with the American Indian. I love American Indians. I got some incredible friends. O.T. Fear is a great friend of mine. And I thought we drove for like 100 miles through an Indian reservation. And I thought, man, I'd like to stop and get my kids some souvenirs. And I had Bill, Ben, and Hank Jr. at that time. And I thought, man, I'll get them some Indian artifacts and some things to take home as a prize. Right. So I got some headdress, and I got some tomahawks, and I got some things that I thought was cool. And I took them from Lake Powell in Arizona to Union to Clover, South Carolina, where I lived on Lake Wiley, and gave them all these neat Indian souvenirs. And so I opened them out of the pack, and I handed them to. So when we got through, I was gathering up the trash where I'd opened it up, and I looked on the back of the package, and it said, genuine Indian artifacts made in Cherokee, North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
So Cherokee, North Carolina is about an hour and a half drive from Clover, South Carolina.
Yeah,
So I
it's
bought
like
those
not
things
that.
in Lake Powell and brought them all the way back to North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, I think it's pretty neat seeing all like the Native American, like the indigenous artworks and stuff like that that they sell that goes straight back into their community. I think it's pretty neat.
Yeah, I do too, and I
Yeah.
brought some of that, but I bought, most of what I bought was for my kids, and it was made an hour and a half from my house.
Yeah.
And I bought it, paid 4 times the price, and brought it all the way across the country. So, that is the story, and I thank Don Seifer and I thank Bobby Garland for the spider jig. What a great bait. And it's still a great bait today. You don't hear much about it, but still a great bait today. And Don Seifer was such a gentleman, so shout out, Don. Thank you, my buddy. I hope you're watching the podcast. And then we got, people ask me the most humiliating tournaments I've ever fished.
Ooh.
What is the most frustrated you've ever been in a tournament? And I fished 2 tournaments in my lifetime where my partner won the tournament in one day. The first day of the event, I had a partner at Kissimmee, Florida. He caught a giant bag of fish and I zeroed. And he won the tournament, never caught another fish the next 2 days, but he caught such a giant bag the day I fished with him, he didn't need another fish. I had a partner at Cherokee, Tennessee that caught a giant bag of fish the first day. I zeroed. He didn't. It's the most demeaning thing. But in Kissimmee, Florida, I had been down there and I'd been practicing, and it was very cold. It was in February. And one morning I trailered, I put in at Camp Lester, which is at the end of the Kissimmee River. You know, when you fish Lake Kissimmee back in those days, we take off at Lake Toho. So you would lock through Toho in the Hatchin Hall, and then you would lock through Hatchin Hall into Cypress, or vice versa. I'm not sure which one comes first, Hatchin Hall or Cypress. And then you'd get into Kissimmee River, and you could run into Lake Kissimmee, and that was the waters we were allowed to fish. So I had trailered that morning down, and I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4:30, and I trailered. I was at Camp Lester on Lake Kissimmee before it was daylight. So I put my running lights on and I eased in, and I got down to a place on the map called Polluted Waters at Lake Kissimmee, and I'm sitting there waiting on it to get daylight. And when it got daylight, it was very cold that morning. I could see fog coming off of the water way out in the middle of the lake. I thought, that's interesting. So I looked, and the water temperature was about 58 degrees. So as I cranked up and I ran out there and dropped my trolling motor and started heading toward that fog, I kept watching my temperature gauge, and it's going up. Well, by the time I got to where the fog was, it was like 70-degree water temperature. So I found a spring, and I looked, and there's a 10-pound bass, and over there's a 10-pound bass, and over there's an 8-pound bass, and I said, ooh, 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 ooh. So I cast me a big old jelly worm in there, and I caught one about 9 pounds right off the bat. So I unhooked that fish, and I threw in this other bed, and man, I had another bite, and I didn't want to set the hook. I pulled, and he came loose. So I thought, man, I found the mother lode. Well, in those days, we had no GPS. We had no waypoints to mark. We had no way to find, and this was not a big spring at all. And so I had marker buoys that I had some that I painted black where you could barely see them. So I threw out a black marker buoy right there in the spring. And then I went about maybe 400 yards, and I threw out an orange marker buoy where I'd be able to see it. So I drew a partner that had no fish. He had caught no fish at all. And so he was very willing to do whatever I wanted to do. And so I told him, I said, I found some really big fish in Lake Kissimmee. I said, we'll have to go through 3 sets of locks to get there, but it's going to be worth it if you're willing to go with me. And he said, hey, I'm all for it. Whatever you want to do, I'm with you. He said, I got some New York style cheesecake, and my wife has made a pecan pie. I'm going to bring us a thermos of coffee. We'll eat good. Hopefully we'll catch a fish. I said, man, that's awesome. So the next morning he shows up, and he's got this big old bag of cheesecake, and he's got pecan pie, and he's got the biggest thermos of coffee I've ever seen. He said, man, I love coffee. You like coffee? I said, no, I don't drink coffee, but I got plenty of water. I'm good. Everything's good. So we take off, and we go through the locks, and we finally get down there. When we get there, I'm so excited. And it took me a minute to find that black marker buoy. The wind was blowing, so there was no fog, no steam, no way to locate this. And I found the orange one, and then I went over. Finally, I found that black marker buoy, which was right there at the spring. And I'm frothing the water. I'm so fired up. There's some big fish in here, but the wind's blowing too much, and I cannot see. The day that I found these fish, it was no wind and I could see. Now I can't see anything, so I'm casting blind. Well, my partner, he cast a worm out, and the seat's folded down. He sticks his rod in the folded down seat, gets him his big old thermos bottle of coffee that probably held 2 gallons. And it's one of those Stanley thermos. The cup is in the lid, so he pulls him a lid full and puts the cap back on, the little screw-in cap back on the thermos bottle, and he gets him out a piece of cheesecake, and he's drinking coffee and eating cheesecake and got that rod. He threw that worm, just letting it lay out there. And he said, you want some of this cheesecake? I said, no, I'm good, man, I'm throwing, I'm going, I'm good. You. So I'm happy, he's not a problem at all. He's not going to catch any of my fish. So he eats that cheesecake and sips on the coffee, and he looks at his rod, and he says, picks that rod up, yeah, ooh, get the net. So he catches a giant, I don't remember, 8, 9 pounds, and we put it in a live well. And so he fixes his little jelly worm and throws it back out there, sticks his rod back in the seat. Make a very long story short, this went on 7 times. I have not got a bite. Every time he'd throw that worm out there and let it lay for 5 or 10 minutes. Never move it. We now read about dead sticking. I never even heard of any of that. That to me it's the biggest nonsense that ever existed. This cat's throwing this thing out there and just letting it lay on the bottom. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. He'd drink a whole cup of coffee, eat a piece of pie, eat a piece of cheesecake, smoke a cigarette, and then pick up his rod. I bet he didn't make 20 casts all day long. I bet I made 20 casts every 10 minutes. And he killed me. He had like 38 pounds.
Wow.
Ended up winning the tournament. And I zeroed. Now, you have to sign the scorecard.
Yeah.
So now I know I'm going to have to walk up stage with this guy with a bag of fish that looks like he quartered an elephant. And I got to walk up on the stage and sign his scorecard with not a bag. 0. Nada. So I'm already embarrassed. So we get back in the locks, and I think, well, dang, he's killed me. It's going to be so embarrassing. Hadn't had nothing to eat all day. I might as well have a piece of that cheesecake. So I said, hey, tell you what, I'd take a piece of that cheesecake while we're waiting on this lock. He said, man, I hate it, but I didn't know you wanted a piece. He said, I ate that cheesecake.
Oh, he ate the whole thing?
The whole
Oh,
thing.
man. That's one of those, just don't make eye contact with anybody. Just, yeah.
Yeah. So then I said, well, I like pecan pie. He said, well, I ate that too.
That's crazy.
So I didn't get nothing to eat. I didn't get any coffee. I didn't care for a cigarette, but I would have liked to have a piece of that pie. It looked pretty good, to be honest with you. And so I ended up with nothing. Ray Scott killed me. Ray Scott called me back. Hank Parker, come back up here. Come up. This is your partner? Where's your bag of fish? You mean you dipped up all these fish? I said, Ray, I just wasn't in the mood to fish. I didn't really want to be I just wanted to be a spectator. And of course, he didn't let up. He ribbed me, and I was so embarrassed and so forth. But the guy won the tournament and never caught another fish. Cherokee, Tennessee, deja vu. I drew a partner. I wasn't on nothing. This time we went in his boat. He had this spot on an island, went out there, and he made 7 casts, caught 7 fish, never got another bite. I didn't get a bite all day long. He ends up winning the tournament off of what he caught the first day. Never caught another fish. He ended up tied, and they had a Southern Death fish off, and he caught a fish on about the 2nd cast. So he ends up winning the tournament. I zeroed. Amazing how all that worked, but
It sure
very
is.
frustrating, very embarrassing, but part of the game, and it is by far the most humiliating, and this is a humiliating sport. It's a humbling sport. I got beat by two guys. I fished a tournament in Millwood, Arkansas, and I found fish on a tram road, old tram road. I caught 14-inch size limit. I caught 25 fish over 13 and a half inch, and not one measured 14 inches. My partner caught 7 fish, and all 7 of them was over 14 inches.
Wow.
No justice in it sometimes.
Oh, man.
So I've had some humiliating times. And then fun times, partners. Partners like Don Seifert, partners like Bobby Murray. I told the story when I fished with Bobby about the pork rind being upside down and him turning it over. I fished with some great guys and had a lot of fun and a lot of learning experience. But when I was a kid, there was a very popular television show called Hee Haw. And one of the characters on Hee Haw was Junior Samples, BR549. And that was his boat number, by the way, BR549. Georgia boat numbers, BR549. But I drew Junior for a partner on Lake Murray in South Carolina. And Junior wanted to stop at a 7-Eleven. They had these rotisserie chickens they put in these full bags. I think Junior got 4 chickens and 5 loaves of bread, and that was before they had 2-liter drinks. They had quart Pepsi Colas. He got 5 quarts of Pepsi.
Good Lord.
I mean, and he ate every bit of that. Looked like a buzzard roost in my boat when he got through. And I had a boat that was just 17 foot long, and when Junior stood on the side, Junior weighed about 3 1/4, maybe 3 1/2. And when he stood on the side, water would run in the splash well, and the bilge pump came on. So Junior had to relieve himself to use the bathroom. And so he goes back there, and that bilge pump hole that pumps the water out is right under where he's standing while he's relieving himself. So he's got the boat all cocked up, and I'm fishing. Man, I'm thinking, I wish he'd hurry up. I mean, this is getting ridiculous. The boat's cocked up, I'm trying to fish, and the bilge pump is running. And so I looked around at Junior, and he's just standing there, exposed. And I said, Junior, what are you doing? And he looked down and said, oh, that's the bilge pump.
Oh, my gosh.
So we had so much fun, and he was just such a nut. Well, and we talked about this also on the podcast a couple of weeks ago about the Big O. The Big O was a hand-carved bait made by Fred Young, and I don't think Bobby Murray got the price right. I had 2 people call me after the podcast with Bobby Murray, and he said, you know, he was talking about those Big O's costing $10 or $15. He said, I was at the tournament at Watts Bars, we were paying $50. We were renting them for $15. Wow. So those Big O's cost like $50 in the 70s. Yep. And so Junior, I'm catching fish on a parrot-colored crankbait. And Junior said, well, I don't understand why you catching them on parrot-colored. I thought you were supposed to match the hatch. And so they're chasing shad. Why would you not be using a shad-colored crankbait? I said, well, Junior, there's 10,000 shad out there, and I'd just be another one of them. When I got that parrot, I stand out. He said, that makes sense. So he opened up his tackle. I bet he had 50 Big O's. I mean, to die for. I'm looking, I thought, oh my goodness, I've never seen that many Big O's. So he's got 50 Big O's. So he said, what do you think about that red one? I said, I think that'd be a good choice. So when he got it out of the tackle box, he looked at it and he said, that thing ain't got but one eye. Fred must have been in a hurry. He just painted one eye. I said, well, get you another one. He said, no, I'm going to use it because that way the bass is going to think he's winking at him when he comes through the water. I said, well, that'd be good, Junior. You tie that on. So first cast he made with it, he threw it up by a boat dock and hung it up. Well, that's a $50 crankbait. I said, I'll get it, Junior. Hold on, I'll get it. He said, no, I'm going to break it off. I said, if that thing had 2 good eyes, he wouldn't have run into that boat dock. He broke it off. Oh, man. I still got that bait somewhere. I went back the next day and I got that bait. Well, I thought that was awesome. But what good times and what memories. And you look back on all those tournaments, the guys like Don Seifert, the guys like Bobby Murray, the guys like D. Thomas, Junior Samples, Larry Nixon, the guys that I got to fish with. The camaraderie, the friendship, the fellowship, and the friends are by far the most important part. All these trophies that I've got, you know, they are all rust and dust, but the memories of the partners and the friends that we made along the way, and the stories. I got so many stories, and I love to reminisce, and I like to tell the old stories, and got a lot of them to come in the future. And I had a guy that asked me to share some of them, so I hope they enjoyed some of the stories. And
Yeah, I enjoyed hearing them. Honestly, I really do.
well, it was exciting days, and the one thing that I will say that some of the guys of today's era don't realize all the pioneer spirit. Lake Powell, we knew going out there that we were 70 or 80 miles, whatever the distance was, and I may be off a little on how far it was, but we all had 18-gallon bass boats, and 18 gallons of gasoline is all your boat would hold. And it was legal at that time to put extra gas tanks in your boat. And several of us, being from the Charlotte, North Carolina, home of NASCAR area, got the bright idea that we could take a NASCAR bladder tank. And that way, once we run that gas out of it, we'd plug into it. Once we ran that gasoline out of that bladder tank, you could fold it up and stick it in your dry storage and it'd be out of your way. So we had bladder tanks that would hold 25 gallons of gasoline. So that gave us the range to go 100 miles or whatever we needed to go. And I was running about 100 miles every day. Gary Klein won that event, and he fished in the back of the bay there at Bullfrog. I think Gary was running like 90 miles one way. So he was running 170, 180 miles a day. And won the event. So it's a pretty interesting tournament. A lot of memories that surround that. A lot of hardship was standing in line or pulling in line in your vehicle waiting to buy 5 gallons of gas. That was kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
But I did. I was smart enough. On the way home, I filled my boat up with 18 gallons of gas, and I filled my bladder tank up with 25 gallons of gas. So that avoided two stops on the way home buying gasoline. So that helped me out.
I couldn't imagine what that would cost today. Going out there, you're spending $500.
Well, it was very frustrating to have to go through the fuel shortage, but we survived and got a lot of memories out of it. So. Bass fishing has not always been easy, but it's always been fun. And when life hands you a lemon, you make lemonade. And what a great event that turned out to be, and how much fun we had. And it's a lot of great stories and great friends that I made traveling around fishing on the bass circuit. And I love sharing them. I hope you enjoy listening to them because they're just such a big part of my life. And I love to be able to brag on people like Don Seifer, who really had a positive impact on me as a human being. What a kind man he was to share that with me. And so I love telling these stories.
That's awesome. That's really neat.
Maybe we'll tell some more one day.
I believe so.
All right.
I believe we got some more.
I think we're about out of time. So
I think so.
you think I talked too long?
No, I think you're good. I think you're good. It was very good stories.
You know, Mama bought me a T-shirt that says I'm talking, I can't shut up.
I can tell you that. I can testify to that one.
So somebody wrote you and said, hey, your papa never lets you talk. You just sit over and be quiet and look pretty. Is that what you do?
No, this is like the first kind of mean comment, I guess, that I've ever received. And it was the only thing that you're good for, Sarah Beth, is sitting there shutting up and looking pretty. I was like, okay, all right, that's fine. That didn't hurt my feelings at all.
I can't do that. If I shut up, I can't look pretty. So you're ahead of him and ahead of me too. I don't know who it was, but
There you go.
We appreciate your comments, good or bad. I
Yeah.
can take a little constructive criticism. I can take just ugly criticism.
Hey, I
just
think
to
it's
know
funny.
you're watching is a big deal.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, we still get the views, so it's all right. Comment all you want. Get the interaction.
Yeah. If you don't like it, that's good. Just let us know. All right, Sarah Beth, it's time for you to tell everybody goodbye.
All right, goodbye. See you guys next week.
All right, gonna tell them about Huckleberry?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Almost forgot. Huckleberry, the links to the website and the high school fishing forums will be in the description below, so make sure you go check those out.
That's so important. We got to support Huckleberry. They're doing everything they can to support high school fishing, so we want to be on their side. So check it out. Go to Huckleberry Apparel and go to high school fishing and see what the forum is, and if you think it applies to you. Hey, you don't even have to be a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. If you've got a local school that is in your neighborhood and you think, man, I'd like to support that fishing team, you can go on Huckleberry Apparel, order you a hat, order you a t-shirt, order you a hoodie, order you a pair of sunglasses, whatever you want, and designate it to the local high school. And we'll make sure that all those funds go into the team in your local area. So you don't have to be a part of a team to be able to contribute to high school fishing, and I think that's pretty cool in itself. So check it out. Go to Huckleberry Apparel and click on high school fishing and check us out. And if it's something you like, order some and designate it to your high school. So we appreciate you listening. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time. God bless you. I'm Hank Parker.